2017, IOHK is focused on applying its Cardano blockchain to emerging markets. Joining us to discuss is Charles Hoskinson and CoinDesk's editor-in-chief, Kevin Reynolds.
Good afternoon, and thank you all for coming. Charles, it's an honor and a pleasure to meet you. The topic of today's interview is the status of Cardano's efforts in Africa. Early last year, Input Output, the company behind Cardano, signed a deal with the Ethiopian government to create a blockchain-based system to track student performance in local schools. In recent weeks, the training phase wrapped up, and I believe implementation has begun. Congratulations.
Yeah. It's been a long road, that one.
Before I get to my questions, in the interest of full disclosure, there were two cryptocurrencies I immediately gravitated to when I joined CoinDesk back in 2020. One was Dogecoin, because of the amusement factor and because, well, dogs, okay? And the other was Cardano for different reasons, because it appealed to my it appealed to my mind and my love of history, literature, and Easter eggs, okay? I say Easter eggs because I can only assume that the foundational phase of Cardano was named Byron because Lord Byron was the father of Ada Lovelace, who is many consider to have written the first computer program. So, in other words, without Byron, there could have been no Ada. So I love that, okay?
Yeah, and also he wrote my favorite poem, She Walks in Beauty.
Like the night.
Yeah.
Yes, I love that too. However, it wasn't just the cleverness that appealed to me. Cardano's emphasis on security and robustness over speed to market also seems smart. After all, Apple is rarely the first to market, okay? It just gets it right. In a world of hacks and rug pulls, if governments and major institutions are ever gonna move to a blockchain, they're gonna choose one for robustness and security, so Cardano's passion for peer-reviewed tech seems smart to me. And this leads me to Cardano's efforts in Africa. Again, this made sense for several reasons, beside it being a huge untapped market. One, assuming it's successful, it will serve as proof of concept for the world to see. Two, it fulfills Cardano's commitment to local empowerment as signaled by the Shelley phase of your development plan, as Percy Shelley was all about taking power from the elites and giving it to everyone everywhere. And three, to obtain all that robustness and security, Cardano is written in Haskell, a very precise but relatively difficult programming language to learn. If Cardano is to fulfill its ambitions, it needs a lot more people trained in Haskell. In 2019, Input Output organized training for female developers in Ethiopia to learn how to write Haskell. So voila, shortage of Haskell-trained developers on the way to being solved. So by helping Ethiopia, Cardano is helping itself in multiple ways. Like the best solutions in math, it's elegant. Girolamo Cardano would have approved. Now on to my questions.
No, you can just keep going.
Okay. Any more and I will need to buy you dinner, okay? Okay. First, your company's director for Africa, John O'Connor, said that there are announcements coming regarding RealFi. Anything you could disclose on that front, or is there any other big news coming, any more countries in the pipeline?
So I think the best way of thinking about it concisely, because I know we have limited time, is that you have to break this problem into three sub-problems. So we'd like to start at the very top, this concept of applications and the use cases like microfinance or remittances and so forth. And we have some jurisdictions where we're exploring these things, like Kenya, for example, where we're working with local partners like Possessia, and there's others. And we're trying to figure out how do you get people into a peer-to-peer lending situation where they can get much better rates that are not usurious. The problem is that usually when you start that process, you realize that you have deficiencies at the layer below. The identity layer, the compliance layer, the creditworthiness layer, these types of things. And they say, oh, well, we need to solve that. So that's what we're doing in Ethiopia with the Ministry of Education deal. We're trying to get credentials on a blockchain. Well, once you have that, you can go to the next step and start building everything, compliance systems, all kinds of things. But then what you find out is that sometimes when you're trying to deploy those things, there's deficiencies at the basement, which is foundational infrastructure, physical infrastructure. So there are things like telecommunications, electricity, and finally computing. So do they have cell phones? Do they have reliable access to power? Do they have telco? So there's projects and pilots in Africa in those areas. In fact, some of them are here. The World Mobile guys are there. And they're in Zanzibar right now. Great team. And they're figuring out, how do we get connectivity to the unconnected throughout Zanzibar? 2 million people, and not just the people, but also the ocean around it, because they'd like to improve the cold chain and the blue economy and so forth to avoid overfishing. So what we're trying to do is come up with a strategy of each of those 3 horizontals in different jurisdictions. Places like Zanzibar and Burundi, they require foundational stuff. Places like Ethiopia, that's usually already there, but you need to really then work on the core, which is identity, compliance, and reputation and credit. And in places like Kenya, there's enough development that usually can go straight to the application. And what we're trying to do is build a portfolio of these things, and we're learning as they learn. These deals usually take about 3 to 7 years to do. But when you actually get them end to end, what you've done is you've built a completely parallel economy, completely new business structures. You're talking about ISPs without CEOs, power generation without centralized companies. You're talking about democratic computing. You're talking about identity where you own your own identity. You're talking about compliance that's done in a global sense, not in a local sense where it's owned by a government. And then the application side, completely peer-to-peer money and completely peer-to-peer finance. So in other words, you've just opted out of the banking system.
Okay. Is there any concrete news, any announcements, anything that you want to reveal?
Well, I think the lending in Kenya is probably the big thing. And we'll talk to you guys when we have a full announcement for it. And there it's going to be, we're trying to figure out, how do you get a stable coin into people's hands for a marketplace that has the same user experience as Kiva?
Next, a tough two-parter, and you'll be rethinking dinner. Since striking the deal with Ethiopia, the reputation of the country's Nobel Peace Prize and winning prime minister has sort of nosedived.
Yeah.
With some people calling his efforts to combat rebels a genocide. Journalists have reportedly been beaten and threatened with prison for just reporting fairly both sides of the conflict. Shelley was nothing if not an idealist. Byron himself died while fighting for his ideals. What would they have said about working with such a regime? Can you separate out helping the government with education helping in the government with education from its conduct in the war? And the second part is, goes even darker. Technology by itself is neither good nor bad. While we are all here excited about the possibilities of blockchain as a force for good, a state agency in India recently announced it was using blockchain to document an individual's caste.
Yeah.
Okay, which is cringy, to say the least, but someone accused of genocide could use it for much, much worse, particularly as you move toward full decentralization in your Voltaire phase, with input-output no longer calling the shots. Instead of being used to track student performance, could it not help track prisoners or dissidents? This calls to mind the literary creation of the other famous Shelley. Does any of this worry you?
Frankenstein. So the thing is that, yeah, it's a good question, actually. It's a very fair question, because we run in the same situation. Like, do you work with Saudi Arabia or not? Do you work with China or not? These types of things. So you look at things on a case-by-case, facts and circumstances basis. So in the case of this Ethiopia deal, the relationship is with the Ministry of Education. And let's really understand what's going on. The government already has the academic records. They're there. The problem is not who has them. The problem is accessibility, portability, and verification. So if you take young kids, you put them into a system where the thing the government already knows is now in their possession, what you've done is you've actually transferred the burden of showing things from the government to the student. So even if the whole country falls apart and shuts down, a young student who just graduated could go to Oxford and say, here are my transcripts, and Oxford can independently verify that without the ministry. You bring up a very interesting question of what happens when technology like that goes beyond a simple use case and goes into national identity.
Right.
And there you have to say, well, what are the ethics of it? What are the checks and balances and controls? What I like about self-sovereign identity is it really doesn't say, well, identity is commanded and controlled by the government. Rather, the individual creates their own credential. That's the concept of self-sovereign identity. And then the individual has a choice of what they choose to share, to whom they choose to share it. I think it's the only way you can actually combat totalitarianism. You don't try to say, evil mean government, you go be better, and then we'll do business with you, because the people running the show are comfortable in power. You have to give the people a tool to resist what's happening real time in that circumstance. It's difficult to know exactly what's going on in places like Ethiopia. You could also look at Yemen. You could look at things in Eastern Europe. There are plenty of conflict zones in the world, over 25 currently active right now. And partners we trade with on a daily basis. For example, how many people here have recently bought something from China? Almost everyone in the room, probably today. 2 million people are in camps in Western China.
Right.
What do you do?
That's what I was thinking of.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, they're using the privacy and AI to keep track of their citizens.
Exactly.
What comes with...
And so what I try to do is say, well, let's try to get your identity to be self-sovereign. Let's try to get you into a system where you have more control over your reputation, your identity, and your commercial interactions. Now, if governments are non-dystopian and free and fair, that's a positive thing. If governments aren't, they'll resist it. So we'll just see what happens. We can only go as far right now as the academic credentials. I know Digital Ethiopia 2025, they want to do a national ID. And in the RFP process and how they select a vendor, what they do, it's really going to show what the intent is. If the intent is to discriminate against certain minorities or shut people out, you can't go any further. If the intent is to give people freedom and liberate people, then you can continue pursuing it. But remember, you don't have to do GovTech to change things in Ethiopia. No. Once this is here and the kids know it, they'll share it with their family, and a competitive parallel private system can exist. So it's not the government's decision. We tend to think, well, how do we convince the government to say yes or no? In Africa, things work very differently. The most popular monies in Africa aren't issued by governments, like M-Pesa is an example of that. So in the absence of stability, leadership, and these other factors, what you can do is you can create private standards that become Pan-African standards, and in many cases are actually stronger than what the nation state does. For example, in South Africa, you want to get something done for cross-border remittances or for tracking people or commerce, you don't talk to the South African government, you talk to ShopRite. The police go and talk to ShopRite when they're looking for somebody because they have so much data on their customers. Like, oh, ShopRite's going to know when they were shopping at the store. That's where we'll find the guy who skipped out on child support or something like that. You see, that's how you get things done. It's work through private standards.
Charles, though, you talked about that at 2025, if depending upon which way the ID program goes, you'll know whether to continue or not. But at some point, your goal is to get out of Cardano altogether. In other words, the control of it, okay?
But I don't control Cardano. Cardano has dozens of development companies, and there's lots of people working on it every day, and the roadmap is an aggregation of all those people. There's more than 1,000 dApps being built. A lot of them are writing SIPs and contributing. Like, all the NFT standards came from the community.
Right.
And the DeFi Alliance told us what to do with Plutus. And so the roadmap is a collaborative effort. We're just one company. We're very focused on deploying solutions into Africa because we'd like to bank the unbanked.
Right.
And that's a business where you have to be patient, things step back. If you ask the US government who to work with in Ethiopia, in Africa 2015, Ethiopia, it's the place to be. They're going to open up and liberate. Now things have changed, facts and circumstances changed. So what do you have to do? You have to go and have diversity. So you go to Kenya and Ghana and Zanzibar and other places, but you never lose sight of the fact that you're not there to work with governments. You're there to work with people at the end of the day. That's the key. And so every time you give someone a cryptocurrency wallet, you give someone a self-sovereign identity, you teach them the principles of this ecosystem. It's like Plato leading somebody out of the cave. They no longer see shadows, they see forms for the first time. They can't go back into the cave. They're out, and that's what we're doing. We're teaching the next generation that there's a different way to think about inclusive accountability, credentials, these types of things. And if that lesson sticks, it will be transformative in all aspects of life.